Hi, Run Guys of the North here. Have you heard of the terminology pretendian? A pretendian is ascribed to a person who claims falsely that they have indigenous heritage. Now, it can be a really damaging thing with big consequences, especially if they are in a public space and taking up spaces that belong to indigenous people. So, for an example, in the news now we see about Buffy Sainte-Marie. She was I always thought she was a Canadian folk singer. She, in fact, is an American white person. This has been verified with her birth certificate that was easily acquired, though she said that she didn't have a birth certificate. Yada, yada, yada. It goes on and on and on. Now, she was in an indigenous space as an indigenous artist, singing, creating, and fighting for indigenous rights, doing good work, doing great work, and won tons and tons and tons of awards, some of them monetary. Recently, BBC Canada did a documentary called The Fifth Element, exposing how this really was a ruse, and then she was obviously so deep into it that it appears she believes it herself. Whatever. The point is, she was getting more business, furthering her career, receiving awards that specifically were meant to be for people of indigenous heritage. Now, I did want to clarify one thing. She did say she was adopted. Well, she said she was adopted as a baby, as a child, but then she also said she was adopted into a Cree family in Canada as a young adult. And that does seem to be verified. And I am in no way negating that, because that is a real thing. When you are adopted into a tribe, this is ceremonial, and this really does have familial responsibility to it. It's a very serious thing. And so she is adopted into this Cree family of hers. But that does not make her indigenous. So that's what I'm getting at. Indigeneity, or DNA, ancestry, and culture all have varying degrees. Some of them overlap, some of them can be are obtained all at once, and others are not. So let me explain what I meant by that. For instance, you can have indigenous DNA, and that doesn't necessarily need to be limited to DNA from the Americas. I'm talking about all indigenous communities. You can have indigenous DNA, and that is a very real thing, and absolutely not be raised in that culture. You can have ancestry, but not have DNA. That's another thing. So in light of recent access that we have to DNA profiles, you don't actually inherit all your ancestors' DNA. That's why we look different and have different abilities, even though we might be full-blooded siblings in the same family. For example, my brother is showing Welsh and Irish DNA, full brother, born of my mother and father. I do not show that in my DNA. I know that I have a 3 times great grandmother from Northern Ireland. I know it's part of my heritage, my ancestry. And I guess that means that I am part of that, but it's not showing up in my DNA. So that's why the DNA stuff is touchy in and of itself. Very interesting. But then there's other storylines, like I'm sure you've heard the misnomer of, people who say my grandmother was descended from a Cherokee princess. When the Cherokee were forcefully removed from their lands in Appalachia and in the South, the German settlers and Scotch-Irish settlers took over those lands, and they then became known as people who were from the Cherokee lands. And just like a game of telephone, over time, people assume that, I have Cherokee heritage, when really you don't have that heritage, that DNA, or that ancestry. you may be from the geographical place that they formerly were from before they were forcefully, unrightfully, horrifically removed. So that's a whole nother way that these types of things get confused. In the case of modern accepting of, well, I have heritage or I have DNA, we have to be careful. As white Americans, I'll say in particular, because I'll speak for the fact that I was born in America and I'm here and obviously what I look like, our white privilege is very, very deceptive. You are benefiting from white privilege, even if you aren't racist. You may have subliminal biases, even though consciously you're not racist. It's wild how we don't realize the gravity and the position that we have by being here and looking the way we do. So it's something you should always check yourself for. Always kind of question yourself and see, am I profiting off of a space that could be filled by someone else? So another example would be, let's just say a famous actor whose wife was criticized because of her accent, and the implication of her Spanish heritage came in question, to which she, though she was culturally raised in that environment partially, she did not have any Spanish ancestry whatsoever. Well, that's, if it just stayed like that, fine. But what happened was she then began to take space up that was meant to be for people with Latina heritage. First of all, coming from Spain, that's European heritage. If you're Spanish, you're not Latina or Latino. That is a different combination. So that's white European heritage. But regardless, she, I believe, was on the cover of Hola and different things like that, which, from my understanding, was supposed to showcase Latina American women. And so she occupied a space, benefited from a space economically, career-wise, that was meant to be for someone of a different heritage. Okay, so these are these ways that we as white Americans insert ourselves into these spaces, whether it's intentional or a conscious grift or just ignorance. It's still your accountability that you have to answer for it, and you need to change it. So that's really, really important. Myself, for example, and this is another way that we have to be careful. I, through my family lineage, have some Sami heritage, but I was not raised culturally Sami. So I know some folk practices and things of that nature that have been passed down, but I wasn't raised in that culture. So to say I am, I don't. I say I have some Sami heritage. See what I mean? Unless you are raised in Sapmi or in the culture of the Sami people, they don't really consider you to be Sami. So you can be of some type of descent hereditarily, but it doesn't mean that you know anything about the culture. Swedish, I was raised in Swedish culture. There's no doubt about that. But that's the difference. So you can be something ethnically, you could be something with your heritage, you can be something that Genetically, DNA wise, obviously I'm Scandinavian, all those things. And I was raised in that type of culture. I was raised in the American culture too. Obviously, I was born here, even though I went back and forth to Sweden, et cetera, et cetera. But Sami, I was not raised in that culture. So I say I am of Sami descent or heritage. I have some people in my ancestry who were indigenous Sami. It's just important for us, as people are so desperate to connect with their ancestors, and that is the bottom line of what I teach, and the need that I have been shown is that people just don't know. They don't know where they're from, and it does cause them problems on where they're going. It does lead to more appropriation of other cultures because you don't know anything. You don't even know what you are to even know what your heritage might be or what your ancestors practiced. So you're going to take the first thing that, kind of you sort of identify with or interests you, or you feel drawn to it. Well, of course you do, because you feel drawn to connect with your ancestors and you just don't know who or what they are. So this is just a little PSA. Really be mindful because, wow, this whole Buffy St. Marie thing, 60 years she profited off of claiming indigeneity. If she would have kept doing what she was doing, like her music and protests and being a voice and being an ally and working with the community and being adopted as an adult and saying, yeah, I'm family with this now, and still saying, however, I'm not going to profit economically off of pretending I have that indigeneity. See how it's such a different thing than just, identifying with and supporting and trying to help. Profiting. And not just profiting, but taking it away from someone else who should have been there. Wow, that's just crazy. But, sometimes people are delulu. We get delusional in our minds, and, I guess if you lie to yourself enough, you can convince yourself of anything. So check yourself, people. That's what I got to say. All right, I love you guys. Talk soon.